You called my name, and I ran out of that place.
Over the past several weeks, we've been going and conquering our fears. And you think about this, and we looked at some of the biggest phobias that are around us forever, and the number one phobia is actually spiders. And so it's something that we're able to relate to. I was reading the book by Carl Whitaker, To Kill a Spider, and he talks about some of his mental struggles and problems that he had to go through. And he's talking about always identifying this thing that was there, but he never really knew where it came from. It wasn't really a problem all the time, but when it was present, when it showed itself, now it was a big deal. But it was hiding away, it never really bothered him, so he just kind of forgot about it. Kind of like the spiders we have in our homes. We know they're there, but at the same time, it's not a problem until you see it and you recognize it. And so we want to share in that as we want to continue to grow. And he was talking about his dad when he was at a conference where he was preaching away, and this lady comes up and she talks about, she says, Pastor, you remove the spider webs from my life. Pray that God remove those from me. Night 2 comes back up with the same request, and he's like, lady, I did this last night, but I'll do it again. And then night 3, he says, God, let's remove the spider, and we'll take care of the web. In the same way, we realize that we've all had these struggles. We all have these webs that we get caught in, fears that we can relate to and that bind us and hold us down. And so today we want to finish our final week of our series here as we look at the fear of belonging. But first, let's open the word of prayer as we go before God in this holy place. God, as we come before you now, God, we realize that we are standing on holy ground. That, God, we are in the midst of your presence. That, God, here we are right in front of you, God, to speak. And God, I pray that you would help remove the distractions of our day, the things coming, things going, things happen, our to-do list. God, for this very moment that we are right here, right in front of you right now as you're ready to speak. God, it's often said there's never bad speakers, just bad listeners. So I pray today, God, that you would open our ears, open our hearts, that, God, we'd be consumed by your word, consumed by this passion, consumed by your fire. How great and how amazing you are, God. How vast your angel armies are, that you're there to defend and protect, to share and to care for us, God, that as we face the fear that you were there and you've not let us down. You've not abandoned, you're not forsaken, but God, you were there. So God, right now, we know you're here. Speak to us. We love you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. So when we think about the idea of that God's empowered us, and I love this verse, and it's been our verse for this whole series, and it's short and sweet. 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And I love because it's so mighty and it's ferocious. And for a little skinny guy like me, when you say the word power and mighty and love, I think, yeah. Because culture looks at me and says, man, you're skinny. Eat something. But my God looks at me and says, you are ferocious, you are mighty, you are strong. And so he's talking, he says, look what you have in front, look who you are. That you've been built up in this way, that I've gifted you with this power and a might, a force of love and self-control. That as we face things, because we understand that we have things all around us, things that fear us and haunt us and scare us and startle us and move us around. And here's the thing that we think about. We have some that are just very, very private. Right? We've got fears and things that are kept away, and yet, while we don't deal with it all the time, they're still there, but we can kind of discard it. We use this in reference to the spider web that's underneath the stairs, or it's in the back corner of the garage, the place where you just don't clean out a lot. And it just now is just, this is part of my home. Welcome to my house, don't mind the spider web, let's keep moving. It's my heart. And then we have the other spider webs that you can walk right into. It's in a doorway. You hit it, and it's very public. Your reaction is undeniable because you swing and you flail, and I'm there. We act outside of grace because we're ripping and pulling. We're just freaking out. But in the same way that fear gets us, rips us down, breaks us down, and now we're here broken in a mess outside of grace. And God says, that's the thing. The webs will get you, but the spider is the one that's laying the webs around you. So where are you at in that moment where God is going to move and shake and say, this is the spider that we got to identify? Over the last 7 weeks, we've looked at this, and for me, this has been difficult. Let's be honest. Because when you start breaking down things, you go through the tough stuff, this is where it gets ugly. Because I have to identify my own life. Well, that's a spider right there, God. God, where did all these spiders come from? And the thing is, well, I've just adapted and I've lived with it, and he says, this is where you're at, and this is what you got to deal with. So how can we continue to identify this? Because these fears that we struggle with, they're going to be more than just physical fears, emotional and psychological, spiritual battles that we're going to wage all the time. And so you think about the idea that, well, here's the day that our fear is to belong. Well, what does that mean? Because I come to church, I'm here, right? Where am I at? And so we begin to see that the fear of belonging, you first identify that with it's committed. Well, we've already done that. We've looked at the risky commitments. We've looked at the idea of being committed. We've looked at being a good neighbor and serving and loving. And so how do you break that down and change it over? Well, let's think about it. To belong is to be known, to be understood. See, the pain is real. Nobody wants to live in a world where they don't feel wanted, or understood, or known. Let's be honest, this is a painful reality we live in. Starts back in grade school. I was picked last. Nobody wanted me on their team. It starts right there and we think about it. It's emotionally draining for us, but here's the thing that we understand. It's like walking right into that web. We get stuck there. And the problem is that no matter where you're at or what age group or what environment that you're in, you always want to seek to please, to fit in, to be a part of it. Right? Whether it's junior high or high school or it's adulthood, we want to belong. It doesn't matter what group you associate with, whether in high school you're academics or athletics, or outside of that you're single or dating, or if you're married or married with kids, or you work from home or you work out of the house. You want to fit in, we want to belong. But the problem is when we do that, just like walking into the web, we act outside of the realms of grace. Right? And I'll put it in one simple phrase, and you've probably said this before. Hey, watch this. In that moment, you were probably not acting with your best judgment, the best design creativity that you could have, but you tried to get the attention of those around you. Right? Because we want to be a part of it. We want to share in it. I was sitting in the waiting room recently and I was listening to a story between a grandmother and her grandson, and grandpa was getting surgery, and so she's going through telling exactly what happened. And of course, being polite, I was trying not to listen, but I was laughing inside hysterically because she's talking about grandpa went on this trip with his buddies and they got bored one night, so they decided that we should go bowling. And so grandpa goes down there, throws the ball. As he goes, the knee gives, and he goes with the ball down the lane. Call the ambulance. Get him there, tore a muscle, all that. Now he's in surgery. As she's telling the story, as I'm trying not to laugh, the little boy is just staring, eyes wide open, like, I have no clue what she's saying. And she stopped and she said, moral of the story is, Grandpa should not be bowling. But in the same way, as you think about our lives, there's probably those moments when you got done with something, those, hey, watch this moments, and you think, what was I doing? I was just trying to get your attention. I was just showing off so I could fit in, and it got us. So we begin to see that in those moments, no matter where you're at. Parents, you do that all the time, trying to connect with your kids, to be like, I'm still young, I'm still youthful, I'm still cool. And usually wipe out or get hurt or do something silly. But that's where it's at. We have this pain that we want to be real, we want to belong, we want to be a part of it. But the problem is, culturally, it says this is who you are, and you don't fit in. That you're not going to be good enough, great enough, whatever it is. And when sin enters in, it says that you are now distant, you're defensive, you're set apart. When God is crying and leading back and says, I want you here with me. And our natural reaction is just to run. We see in Genesis chapter 3, 9 and 10, we're just going to stop here briefly. But the Lord God called to the man, where are you? He answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. What's interesting about this is this wasn't the first time, as it points to, that God has walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. But in this moment, Adam already knew the sound of God coming before him, that God was walking in their presence. And so in that moment, they hid. They'd already sinned. They'd already separated. There's a distance between him and God. And so in this moment here, as they would normally share in this time, as they've gone and they fashioned this new garment, they've gone and hid in the nighttime so it's less visible to be seen. We begin to see that there was this thing that happened, and there's this distance that formed between them and God. This distance that is there now that caused them to hide themselves. Ironically, as they fashioned this new clothes, they were new creators of something new. They didn't run to God to show it off, but they ran to hide. The distance is there. But in that passage, what's interesting to me is the simple phrase, "Where are you?" Because God knows who you are. He knows what you're going through. He knew where they were. But it was the cry of a hurt parent. The cry of the parent that knew that his child was hurting, that they were broken and they feel like they didn't belong. And so he's calling out to, "Where are you? Where are you?" And when I read through that and I thought about, where do I feel like I belong, or where do I feel like I don't belong, and do I feel like I fit in, I kept hearing that phrase over and over again where he says, "Where are you? What have you been told? What lies have you believed? What fears have you called yourself believing that told you you didn't belong?" And so in this moment, he's just the anguished father, waiting for his beloved, his creation, to come back, to take part, to feel connected. And then we begin to see the defensive nature of man kick in. Man said, "The woman you put me here with, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me and I ate it." Here we see that this defensive nature as it builds and it takes place. They were made afraid by God's presence. So that they've been there so numerous times, but now in this moment they were afraid. They were scared of what was there. It became defensive, just like our human nature. We point blank, we shift it. The regret of sin was grooming and building inside them, but in this moment they find themselves now leading and pointing the other way. He says it's her fault. It was her. Unlike David's cry in 2 Samuel, David said, "Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord." He came straight forward and says, "This is what I've done." David wanted to belong. He didn't run, he didn't defend. He came back to the point. And Nathan says, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You've been healed." But we begin to see that something even greater takes place here in that passage. As Adam points to Eve, after he points at Eve, he essentially points at God. He says that, "God, this is your fault. You put her here. You caused me to sin." And so Adam took all the blame here because he never recognized his own play, his own fault, that he was deceived. And so we begin to see that it is a sin for us to exchange the truth of God for the lie of this life. That we run distant, that we stray away, that we keep seeking. We're going to keep going and going and going until we get back to the reality of who we are. That God has created us to belong, to be part of, to share. But we only do that through certain practices and ways that we can release the tension, to release the cry that we have that causes us to run away. Romans 1:25 says, "They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who's forever praised." We begin to see that the fear of belonging is this. It's the fear of not being truly known or understood. That incites the fear of not belonging. We struggle with that. Do people really know who I really am? Do they just know a glimpse of me, or do they actually know me? How many people walk around just broken because nobody knows exactly who they are? The things that make them up, that build them up, that identifies them with who they are. But so often we go by what culture says, that small portion, and that becomes our whole identity. But we have to realize that through the eyes of grace, that we are more than what meets the eye. Tim Elmore, he wrote a book about habitudes, the images of leaderships that are formed in habits and attitudes. And he talks about this from a corporate realm, but the same way, he's a strong spiritual guy, and so he uses these same practices to relate to the Christian walk and the way we go. And he uses the iceberg as a reference here. Have you ever seen an iceberg that's in the water? There's a small mass that's above water, but we all know that below the surface is a large structure of ice. It's right there for us. And it applies this as we look at our spiritual walks, as people often examine and view us and say, you're identified by this top portion, this 10% of who you are is what the world's going to classify you by. That's your skills and your talents, your giftedness, the things that people can see and worship and celebrate with you. But there's 90% of you that's below the surface, that's shut off, that's hard to see, and that's your character and your spiritual foundation. But when you think about it, when you think about icebergs and the damage they can do, it's not the 10% above the surface that causes the harm. It's the 90 below the surface that will sink the ship. An iceberg is an interesting picture when you think about it, because it's more than what meets the eye. It's more than what you would expect or count on. And in the story here, if you haven't seen the movie Titanic, spoiler alert, but the boat sinks. So just want to let you in on that before we get here too far here. I don't want to ruin it for you, but it sinks. But on that fateful night that the Titanic went down, as they were traveling through and they saw icebergs, they kept getting these warning calls. 5 warning calls went dismissed to watch out for icebergs. To watch out for icebergs. Over and over again. Then about in the middle of the night, about 3 in the morning, they received that final call, the 6th and final one. And the operator who got the call that said, watch out for icebergs, responded back harshly and abruptly, saying this, shut up, I'm busy. 30 minutes later, the Titanic sunk. See, what we have to realize is that in those moments when we receive warnings, when we are seeking to belong, when people are reaching out and trying to pull us in and warning and guiding us, there's more than what meets the eye. And for you and I, as we walk and we share that as God in this world says, this is who you are, God says, I've got so much more for you. I've got so much more planned for you. And we get caught up in this one idea, in this one aspect, and we overpower our ability over the power of God. We overbuilt the attitude and thoughts of others over our Creator, our perfecter of our faith. And so as we focus in, as we seek out who God is, we're reminded that we have to be the 90% below the surface. Our core abilities, our core traits, as he leads us to this, he writes and says, self-discipline is part of that core foundation that you need. To do what is right even when you don't feel like it. To have core values, the principle that help us make a stand when we need a stand. The sense of identity, to understand that you are exactly who God created you to be. That God wants you to work through, that his grace will be the change that you need. And he says that emotional security, to be able to be secure in your thoughts and your attitudes. He says that we have all these things and we need to improve on all of them. But he says that we have to lay that foundation, that we have to have more than what meets the eye in order to help lead others. To have a spiritual essence that is more than just what's floating on the top. Because if we're just that 10% that's floating on the water, we're essentially ice cubes, being drifted back and forth. But to belong means that we're rooted in, we're connected, that there's a foundational core, a basis for who we are, what we believe, that we understand that it's more than just what meets the eye. He says, whenever we have weak character, weak spiritual growth, our foundation is broken. Eventually our vessel will sink. It's only so long we can survive with the top 10%. When you think about this, it's hard not to think about our society and our culture and to neglect those in the limelight. But think about those who are in Hollywood and actors, and you've got athletes, and you've got famous preachers, you've got all these people out there who've got a voice and a platform to stand on. And they're there because of their talent. They're there because of their 10%. But it's their character, the other 90, that will keep them there. Belonging takes your talents and gets you there. But character keeps you there. The problem is, as we stand, as we make a stand, if we're forming our own foundation, it's easy for us to seek to crumble, to fall, to break down. When we see people who are on the top, who are much more public in the limelight, who are unwilling to make a stand, who are unwilling to proclaim what they believe in, it's no longer just about belonging to the gospel, to understand our identity, but now it's an association. Will I be willing to connect with them? Will I be able to identify as that? See, we have so much more fears than just being committed. A fear of, are we worthy? Or a fear of that, is this who God has designed me? Is our fear of, can I even associate with this crowd anymore? When we're unwilling to make a stand. He challenges us, are we just drifting like ice cubes? Or are we icebergs? But we begin to see that culturally, that we are together. And to belong means as we gather together, that we're going to have to take some risks to be community. Community that walks together, that fights together, that shares together, that cries together, loves together. We're going to build, to improve, to encourage, that we can be united as one. To be a stronger value that we begin to see. And we understand this is a huge risk because you and I, we're different. Your skills, talent, everything's different. Your personality's different. You're going to clash with people. But he says, are you willing to take the risk to be united with what you believe? We identify with, well, this is who I am, this is my and it says, that's your personality, but who's your God? We put certain things first for our King. Where's your foundation? What's the core that's below the surface? To be part of community means you got to take a risk. It means that there is no return without risk. To love and to share and to be a part of each other, that's a risk. 1 Peter 1:22 says, now that you have been purified yourselves by obeying the truth so that you have sincere love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. He says belonging and holy living are two different things. He says there's nothing without love. He says that we are encouraged to exercise love, to be in part, to practice this. As we open and we share, that we invest in each other, that we understand that we've been accepted, we've been brought into this holy family. But to not risk is even scarier. To be without hope, to be without grace. 1 Corinthians 13:7 says, love always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. That we stand strong together. And Paul uses a dangerous word here. Always, 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 in all things, it stands. Culturally, we live in a sometimes culture. Not all the time. Sometimes I'll go do that. Sometimes I'd like, he says, in all things, all the time. Through all power, all thoughts, all beliefs, all is wrapped up in his identity. So our faith is based upon our love. Our faith is based upon our practice. And so as we focus on this, we were able to see that risk, that we have to take the risk to find security in our Maker. To step out and say, God, I believe that, God, you are working. That, God, that you haven't stopped working. And so as long as you're going to keep working, I'm going to keep waiting. I'm going to keep building. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep searching and seeking. Because my identity has been found in God. That my identity is found in a Maker who loves and seeks me, who calls me by name and says, where have you been? That's heartbroken, that loves and extends upon my sin. His love that is reaching and rewarding, that says, here I am, just come with me. Don't seek, don't run, don't hide. Come home. We're reminded of this, Matthew 22:37-39, as we look at this in our neighboring series. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. The first of these greatest commandments, and the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. See, Jesus brings this to us. That we need to be with one another, that we're to share. So it's easy for us to say that we sit back and I love the Lord, but what about others? The thing is, though, that we're all broken. Yes, we've fallen short. Yes, we're seeking to live better every single day. To live in a more perfect way of loving each other. But he says that we should extend that care to be community, to share. Romans 15:7, it says, accept one another, then just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. What a powerful verse. Because we looked at a couple weeks ago that you and I have been accepted. That he looked at us and he said, because of who you are, I know you by name. Redeemed and restored, adopted, accepted, my love. He looks at you and I and gives us these new names, this new identity. He says, because you are mine, you've been accepted. And so now we see the challenge of not only accepting his gift, but now it's accepting the risk. The fear of belonging, fearing that people would know who we are. People would understand us, that we'd open up. But we have to overcome our fears. Spurgeon says, Christ did not receive us because we were perfect, because he could see no fault in us, or because he hoped to gain somewhat at our hands. But in loving concession, covering our faults and seeking our good, he welcomed us to his heart. So in the same way that we had same purpose, let us receive one another. That we would learn to belong, to share, to impart. So because of that, we understand that in that idea that we have to come to the purpose, back to the value, the core of who we are. That we've been created in his image. We start from the beginning. We find our identity that he is our creator, our maker, our Father, the one that seeks us out and saw us, that paid the price, that called us home and says, you are accepted. His arms were reached and brought us in. And then he looked at us and says, you know what? All those chains, the weight of your past, your baggage, the struggles you've had, that 10% top of the world identify you as you're more than that. And he breaks the chains of our bondage. He breaks the chains of our debt and takes it away, that we wouldn't have to be slaves to that anymore, that we would no longer serve a fearful master, that we'd serve of God, of love. We understand that God has gifted us with not fear, but power, love, and self-control. And let's be honest, when you think about it, when you break it down, when you think, well, God, you're going to take that out, you're going to help me conquer this, it might be more fearful than the initial fear that you started with. Because it's the path of the unknown. It's the path of the unexpected, the things that we don't understand. But what he tells us is that you and I, we are his. Those chains are broken. We are no longer bound to fear because we are the children of God. That we are the family of God.